The security guard watched silently as a young boy led the confused elderly man through the city. When a business card fell from the old man's pocket, the boy's face went pale. Marcus Johnson's sneakers scraped against the cracked sidewalk as he walked home from school. The autumn wind whipped around the skyscrapers of downtown, sending dry leaves skittering across his path. His green sweatshirt, one size too big, flapped against his skinny frame. "Hey, watch it." A businessman in a dark suit shouldered past him, nearly knocking his backpack off. Marcus steadied himself against a lamppost. "Sorry," he mumbled, even though it wasn't his fault. His mom had taught him to always be polite, especially in this part of town. The financial district loomed above him, all glass and steel reaching into the cloudy sky. Every day, he took this route home, walking past people who probably made more money in a day than his mom did in a month. His stomach growled. The lunch money had gone to helping with the electric bill instead. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mom, "Working late again tonight. Leftover pasta in fridge. Love you." Marcus typed back quickly. "Okay, Mom. Love you too." He ignored the hollow feeling in his chest. At 12 years old, he was used to being alone in the afternoons. Had to be. The wind picked up again, carrying voices from a crowd gathering near the intersection ahead. Marcus checked his watch, 4:15 p.m. He should head straight home, but something about the growing cluster of people made him pause. "Someone should call the police," a woman in a business suit said, holding up her phone to record. "I already did," another man replied. "They said they are sending someone." Marcus pushed through the small crowd, curiosity getting the better of him. In the middle of the gathering stood an elderly man in an expensive-looking beige sweater and gray slacks. The man kept turning in circles, his white hair disheveled, eyes wide with confusion. "I need to get home," the old man said, his voice trembling. "But I can't remember." The crowd kept their distance, some filming with their phones, others whispering among themselves. A suited man stood apart from the group, watching intently but making no move to help. Marcus's throat tightened. The lost look in the old man's eyes reminded him of his grandfather in those final months before he passed away. The same confusion, the same fear. "My daughter," the elderly man muttered, patting his pockets. "I should call my daughter, but I can't remember the number." "Why can't I remember?" Marcus heard his mother's voice in his head. "Never talk to strangers, baby. Especially not in this part of town." But his grandfather's face kept flashing in his mind. How scared he'd been when he couldn't remember where he was. How grateful when someone helped him find his way back to himself. The old man's hands were shaking now. He looked up at the towering buildings around him, tears forming in his eyes. Nothing looks right. Nothing looks right at all. Marcus glanced at his phone again. His mom wouldn't be home for hours. The police might take just as long, especially in this neighborhood. He thought about his grandfather, about all the times he'd wished someone had been there to help when he wandered off. His heart pounded as he stepped forward. The suited man watching from the edge of the crowd straightened up, his eyes narrowing. Marcus swallowed hard but kept moving. "Excuse me, sir?" His voice came out smaller than he intended. The old man turned, blinking in confusion. Marcus cleared his throat and tried again. "Sir, I noticed you seem lost. Can I help you get home?" The elderly man's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Home? Yes, I need to get home. But I can't. The streets look different." "That's okay," Marcus said, forcing himself to smile like his mom did when she was trying to be brave. "We can figure it out together. I'm Marcus." "What's your name, sir?" "Richard," the old man said, then frowned. "At least, I think it's Richard." "Everything's so foggy today." Marcus nodded, remembering how his grandfather would get more agitated if you showed you were worried. "That's okay, Mr. Richard. Sometimes things get foggy. Do you remember what your house looks like? Or maybe what street it's on?" From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw the suited man take a step closer, his hand inside his jacket. The crowd continued to film, but no one else moved to help. It's a big house," Richard said slowly. "Brown stones. There's a garden in the back. My daughter takes care of it now." "That's good," Marcus encouraged. "That helps. Which direction were you walking from?" Richard's face crumpled. I don't know. I was just going for a short walk." But then everything changed. Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest. How many times had his grandfather said those exact words? He glanced at the crowd, still filming, still whispering. The suited man hadn't moved, but his eyes hadn't left them either. "Mr. Richard," Marcus said gently, "would it be okay if I walked with you for a bit? Maybe things will start looking familiar if we move around." The old man reached out and grabbed Marcus's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You won't leave me?" Marcus squeezed back, ignoring the voice in his head telling him this was a bad idea. "No, sir, I won't leave you. We'll find your home together." The suited man took another step forward as Marcus and Richard began to walk. The crowd parted, phones still recording. Marcus felt the weight of all those eyes on him, but he focused on Richard's hand in his, remembering how his grandfather always seemed calmer with someone to hold on to. "Thank you," Richard whispered. Everyone else just stared, just like they stared at me in the store yesterday when I couldn't remember how to count my change. Marcus's chest tightened. "My grandfather had Alzheimer's," he found himself saying. "He used to get confused too. But he was still him, you know? Just needed a little help sometimes." Richard's grip relaxed slightly. "Your grandfather, is he?" "He passed away 3 years ago," Marcus said quietly. "I miss him a lot." They walked in silence for a moment, leaving the crowd behind. The suited man followed at a distance, his footsteps barely audible on the sidewalk. "Marcus," Richard said suddenly. "I'm scared." Marcus squeezed his hand again. "I know, Mr. Richard. But we'll figure this out. One step at a time, okay?" The sun was starting to sink behind the skyscrapers, painting the streets in shades of orange and purple. Marcus knew his mom would be worried if he was late, but he couldn't leave now. Not when Richard was holding his hand like it was a lifeline, not when he looked so much like Grandpa did on his bad days. They turned another corner, the suited man's footsteps echoing behind them. Richard stumbled slightly, and Marcus steadied him. "Maybe we should rest for a minute," Marcus suggested, spotting a bench ahead. "Sometimes my grandfather would remember things better when he wasn't tired." As they sat down, something fell from Richard's pocket, a small white rectangle that fluttered to the ground. Marcus reached down to pick it up, and his heart stopped. It was a business card, and the name on it made his blood run cold. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street, as Marcus stared at the name that would change everything. Richard Thompson, CEO and founder, Thompson Technologies. The suited man was suddenly much closer, his hand still inside his jacket, watching Marcus's every move. Marcus's hands trembled as he held the business card. The setting sun caught the gold-embossed letters, making them shimmer. Thompson Technologies, the company whose building he passed every day, whose name was plastered across half the city's billboards. "Is this yours, Mr. Richard?" His voice cracked slightly. Richard squinted at the card, then shook his head. "I don't. Maybe? Everything's so blurry today." The suited man took another step closer. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest as he held out the card. "Sir, are you with Mr. Thompson?" The man nodded slowly, reaching into his jacket. Marcus flinched, but the man only pulled out his own business card. "James Martinez, head of security for Mr. Thompson. I've been following to ensure his safety while assessing your intentions." Marcus's phone buzzed again. "His mom," he answered quickly, turning slightly away from Mr. Martinez. Mom? Marcus, where are you? It's getting dark." The worry in her voice made his stomach twist. "I'm okay, Mom. I'm helping someone who's lost. Like Grandpa used to get sometimes." He heard a sharp intake of breath. "Baby, you know how dangerous that can be. Where are you exactly?" Marcus looked around. "Near Thompson Tower. There's a security guard here too. I can't leave him, Mom. He reminds me so much of Grandpa." A long pause. "Put the security guard on the phone." Marcus handed his phone to Mr. Martinez, who spoke quietly with his mother for several minutes. Meanwhile, Richard had started rubbing his temples, his confusion visibly growing. "The streets keep changing," Richard muttered. "Why do they keep changing?" "They are not changing, Mr. Richard," Marcus said gently. "Sometimes our minds just see things differently. My grandpa used to say it was like looking through a foggy window." Mr. Martinez handed the phone back. "Your mother has given permission for you to continue helping, provided I remain with you. She says to keep your phone on and check in every 30 minutes. Marcus pressed the phone to his ear. "Mom, I don't like this, baby." But Mr. Martinez explained who Mr. Thompson is. "Just Be careful. Call me if anything feels wrong. Promise. I promise. Mom. Love you. Love you too. Baby. Marcus tucked his phone away and turned back to Richard, who was staring at a nearby street sign with intense concentration. Maple Street, Richard said suddenly. My daughter, something about Maple Street. Mr. Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Thompson's residence is near Maple Street, but that's across town. We should call for a car. No. Richard grabbed Marcus's hand again, his grip painfully tight. No cars. They make everything spin. Please, just walk with me. Marcus looked at Mr. Martinez. My grandfather was the same way. Cars made him more confused. Sometimes walking helps. The exercise clears the mind a bit. The security guard checked his watch, then nodded reluctantly. Very well, but we need to be careful. The media would have a field day if they knew Mr. Thompson was wandering the streets. They started walking again, Richard's hand still gripping Marcus's. The city was shifting into its evening rhythm, office workers hurrying to catch trains, restaurants starting to fill, street lights flickering to life. Tell me about your grandfather, Richard said suddenly. You keep mentioning him. Marcus swallowed hard. His name was William. He lived with us after Grandma died. He used to be a teacher, but then he started forgetting things. Little things at first. Where he put his keys, what day it was. Then bigger things, like what street you live on, Richard said quietly. Yeah, like that. Marcus helped Richard step around a broken piece of sidewalk. But he was still Grandpa. He still told the best stories when he was having good days. Still gave the best hugs. Mr. Martinez walked a few steps behind them, one hand pressed to his earpiece. Marcus could hear him speaking quietly, presumably updating someone about their situation. They walked for another 15 minutes before Richard started to slow down, his breathing becoming labored. Marcus spotted another bench and guided him to it. Let's rest for a minute, Mr. Richard. No rush. As they sat, Richard's face scrunched up in concentration. I remember, there's a coffee shop near my house. The girl there always remembers my order. Mr. Martinez straightened. Gloria's Coffee? On Parker Street. Richard's eyes lit up. Yes, Gloria. She has red hair. She calls me Mr. T. That's great, Marcus said encouragingly. We're getting closer. Can you remember anything else about the area? Richard closed his eyes. Trees. Big old trees lining the street. And a church. With a blue door. Mr. Martinez nodded. St. Michael's. We're heading in the right direction, but it's still quite a walk. Marcus's phone buzzed, another text from his mom. He quickly responded, letting her know they were okay and had a lead on Richard's home. The sun had almost completely set now, the street lights casting long shadows. The evening crowds were thinning, replaced by the night shift of the city. Marcus's legs were starting to ache, but he remembered how his grandfather used to get more anxious at night. Mr. Richard, would you like to hear about the time my grandfather tried to teach me chess? Marcus asked as they started walking again. Keeping people with Alzheimer's talking sometimes helped them stay calm. Chess. Richard's face brightened slightly. I used to play chess. With someone. My brother maybe. Your daughter, sir, Mr. Martinez supplied gently. You and Ms. Catherine play every Sunday. Catherine, Richard repeated the name like a prayer. Yes, my Catherine. She must be so worried. Marcus's phone screen suddenly went dark, battery dead. His stomach dropped. Mr. Martinez, could you let my mom know my phone died? She'll panic if she can't reach me. The security guard nodded, already pulling out his own phone. But before he could dial, Richard stopped walking, his whole body going rigid. Something's wrong, he said, his voice trembling. The fog's getting thicker. I can't remember Catherine's face. Why can't I remember my daughter's face? Marcus felt the old man's hand starting to shake in his. He'd seen this before, the moment when confusion turned to panic. His grandfather had gone through it countless times. Mr. Richard, look at me, Marcus said firmly, turning to face the elderly man. Focus on my voice. The fog will pass. Catherine knows you love her, even when you can't see her face clearly. But what if it doesn't pass? Richard's voice cracked. What if I forget everything? Everyone? Marcus squeezed his hand. Then we'll remember for you. Just like my mom and I remembered for Grandpa. You're not alone, Mr. Richard. Not ever. A tear rolled down Richard's cheek, catching the street light. Behind them, Mr. Martinez had stepped away to make his calls, his low voice mixing with the distant city sounds. "You're a good boy, Marcus," Richard said softly. "Your grandfather must have been very proud." Marcus felt his own eyes stinging. "I hope so. I miss him a lot." They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, as the city moved around them. Then Richard straightened up, wiping his eyes with his free hand. "We should keep going," he said. I think I'm starting to remember more." The coffee shop. We turned left at the coffee shop. Marcus nodded, pulling gently on Richard's hand. "Then that's where we'll go. One step at a time. Just like before." Mr. Martinez rejoined them, tucking his phone away. "Your mother says to be careful, Marcus. And Mr. Thompson's daughter has been notified that we're on our way. She's very grateful for your help." They turned another corner, and Richard's step faltered. The fog was rolling in from the bay, making the street lights blur into soft halos. The temperature was dropping, and Marcus could feel Richard starting to shiver despite his expensive sweater. "We're getting close," Mr. Martinez assured them. "Gloria's coffee is just a few blocks away." But as they walked, Marcus noticed Richard's grip getting tighter, his breathing more rapid. The city at night was different, darker, louder in some ways and quieter in others. More confusing for someone already lost in the fog of their mind. Marcus remembered his grandfather's worst moments had always come after sunset. The shadows played tricks, he'd said, made familiar things look strange and threatening. "Mr. Richard," Marcus kept his voice steady, "would you like to hear another story about my grandfather? About the time he tried to teach me to make his famous pancakes?" The old man nodded gratefully, and Marcus launched into the tale, letting his voice create a familiar anchor in the growing darkness. Behind them, Mr. Martinez maintained his vigilant watch, a silent guardian as they made their way through the transforming city. The fog continued to thicken, wrapping around the street lights like cotton. But Marcus kept talking, kept holding Richard's hand, kept moving forward. Sometimes the longest journeys happened one story at a time. The neon sign of Gloria's coffee cut through the fog like a beacon. Richard stopped walking, his eyes fixed on the warm light spilling from the shop's windows. "I know this place," he said slowly. "Gloria always makes my coffee just right. 2 sugars, splash of cream." Mr. Martinez nodded. "That's right. So we're getting close to home now." The coffee shop was closing up for the night. Through the window, they could see a red-headed woman wiping down tables. She looked up as they passed, her eyes widening in recognition. "Mr. T." She hurried to the door, bell jingling as she opened it. "We've been so worried. Catherine's been calling everywhere looking for you." Richard shrunk back, pressing closer to Marcus. "Hi. I'm sorry." The streets, they kept changing. Gloria's expression softened. "It's okay, Mr. T. You got help now." She looked at Marcus, then at Mr. Martinez. "His house is just a few blocks away. Up on Highland, the big brownstone with the copper gutters." "Thank you, Gloria," Mr. Martinez said. "We'll get him home safely." As they turned up Highland Street, Richard's steps became more uncertain. The fog had thickened into a heavy blanket, making the grand old houses loom like shadows. "Something fell," Richard said suddenly, patting his pockets. "I had something important in my pocket." "Your business card?" Marcus asked. "I picked it up earlier. Remember? From Thompson Technologies." Richard's face creased in confusion. "Thompson Technologies?" "Yes, sir," Mr. Martinez said gently. "Your company. You founded it 30 years ago." Richard stopped walking, his hand tightening around Marcus's. "My company? No, that can't be right. I'm just Richard. I walk to get coffee. I play chess with Catherine," Marcus reminded him softly. "Your daughter." "Everything's slipping away again," Richard whispered. His free hand came up to press against his temple. "The fog's getting thicker in my mind." Marcus recognized the rising panic in his voice. It was the same tone his grandfather had used when the confusion got too overwhelming. He needed to act fast. "Mr. Richard, let's play a game. My grandfather and I used to do this. Tell me one thing you can see right now." Richard blinked, focusing on their surroundings. "Trees. Big old trees. Good. Now one thing you can hear. A car alarm. Far away. And one thing you can feel." Richard squeezed Marcus's hand. "You holding my hand. Keeping me safe." Mr. Martinez watched this exchange with quiet respect, then pointed ahead. "Sir, look, do you recognize that house?" Through the fog, a massive brownstone emerged. Warm light glowed from the windows, and even in the darkness, the copper gutters gleamed. A woman stood on the front steps, her silhouette sharp against the porch light. "Daddy!" Her voice carried down the street. "Daddy, is that you?" Richard froze. "Catherine!" The woman started running toward them, her heels clicking on the sidewalk. As she got closer, Marcus could see she had Richard's eyes. "Oh, Daddy," she said, reaching for him. "We've been so worried when you didn't come back from your walk." Richard let go of Marcus's hand to embrace his daughter. "I'm sorry, Kitty Cat." The streets, they weren't where they were supposed to be. Catherine held him tight, then looked over his shoulder at Marcus. "And who is this young man?" Before anyone could answer, more people emerged from the house, another security guard, a butler, and a woman in a nurse's uniform. "Mr. Thompson needs rest," the nurse said firmly. "It's been a long day." Richard turned back to Marcus, reaching for his hand again. "This is Marcus. He helped me when everyone else just stared. He told me stories about his grandfather." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for bringing my father home." The nurse and the butler gently led Richard toward the house. He kept looking back at Marcus, confusion and clarity warring in his expression. "Wait," Richard called out suddenly. "Marcus's grandfather. He had the fog too. The fog that's in my mind now." Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Martinez stepped forward. "Ms. Thompson, perhaps we could all go inside? There's much to discuss." Marcus stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, suddenly very aware of his worn sneakers and oversized sweatshirt. These people lived in a different world than his. "Of course," Catherine said. "Marcus, would you please come in? We'd like to thank you properly." "I should call my mom first," Marcus said. "But my phone died." "Use mine," Mr. Martinez offered, holding out his phone. Marcus's mom answered on the first ring. After a brief conversation and assurance from both Mr. Martinez and Catherine, she agreed to let Marcus stay a bit longer. The inside of the Thompson house was like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, paintings in golden frames. Marcus followed Catherine into a study where Richard sat in a leather armchair, the nurse checking his blood pressure. "Blood pressure's a bit high," the nurse reported. "He needs to rest soon." "Just a few minutes," Richard insisted. "I need to thank the boy properly." He looked at Marcus. "You said your grandfather had what I have." Marcus nodded. "Alzheimer's. He passed away 3 years ago. And you recognized the signs in me? That's why you helped?" "Yes. So you had the same look he used to get when he was lost." "I couldn't just walk past. Not when I knew how scared you must be." Catherine wiped tears from her eyes. "Most people did just walk past. Or worse, took videos for social media." "Marcus," Richard said, his voice stronger now, "you showed kindness when others showed indifference. You gave up your afternoon to help a confused old man find his way home. How can we repay such kindness?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "You don't need to repay me, Mr. Thompson. I just did what I hoped someone would have done for my grandfather." "Nevertheless," Catherine interjected, "would like to do something. Mr. Martinez mentioned you live with your mother, that things are difficult." Marcus felt his face grow hot. "We manage okay." Richard leaned forward in his chair. "Your mother works 2 jobs, yes? To keep you in your apartment. How did you?" "Mr. Martinez is very thorough," Richard said, a flash of his business acumen showing through the confusion. "He made some calls while we were walking." The nurse cleared her throat. "Mr. Thompson, you need to rest now." "In a moment," Richard said firmly. "First, I need to make something clear." He focused on Marcus with surprising intensity. "Young man, you showed me something today that I've been forgetting lately. That true wealth isn't in bank accounts or business deals. It's in how we treat each other, in the kindness we show when it would be easier to walk away." Catherine touched her father's shoulder. "Daddy, maybe we should discuss this tomorrow, when you're rested." "No," Richard insisted. "It has to be now, while my mind is clear. I may not remember this tomorrow, but I need to say it now." He looked at Marcus again. "I want to set up a trust fund for you. For your education, your future, and your family's security." Marcus's knees went weak. He grabbed the back of a nearby chair for support. "Mr. Thompson, That's too much. I just wanted to help. Exactly, Richard said softly. You just wanted to help. Do you know how rare that is in this world? How precious? He turned to his daughter. Catherine, make it happen. Make sure this boy and his mother never have to worry about rent or bills or school fees again. The nurse stepped forward again, more insistent this time. Mr. Thompson, please. You need rest. Richard stood shakily, reaching for Marcus's hand one last time. Thank you, young man, for reminding an old fool what really matters in this fog-filled world of ours. As the nurse led Richard away, Catherine turned to Marcus. Why don't you come back tomorrow? We can discuss the details then, and I'm sure my father would love to see you again. Marcus nodded, still stunned by everything that had happened. Mr. Martinez offered to drive him home, and this time, Marcus accepted. As they walked out to the car, Marcus looked back at the grand brownstone. Through an upstairs window, he could see Richard being helped into bed, the nurse drawing the curtains. The fog was lifting now, revealing a sky full of stars. Marcus thought about his grandfather, about how proud he would be of this moment. Sometimes the biggest changes in life came from the smallest acts of kindness, from simply choosing to stop when others walked away. Marcus barely slept that night. He lay in his bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling while his mind replayed everything that had happened. The distant sound of sirens and his mother's gentle snoring from the next room provided a familiar soundtrack to his thoughts. His phone, now charged, buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. Car will pick you up at 9 a.m. Catherine Thompson. The morning came too quickly. Marcus stood in front of his bedroom mirror, trying to smooth down his shirt, one of his better ones, though it still had a small tear near the collar. Baby. His mom appeared in the doorway, already in her waitress uniform. You sure about this? Yeah, Mom. Mr. Thompson is like Grandpa was. He needs someone who understands. She crossed the room and straightened his collar. You've got such a big heart, just like your grandfather. She paused, chewing her lip. But these people, they're different from us. Just be careful, okay? A car horn beeped outside. Marcus looked out the window to see a sleek black car parked in front of their building. Mr. Martinez stood beside it, looking out of place among the graffiti and overflowing trash cans. That's my ride, Marcus said, his stomach doing flips. His mother hugged him tight. Call me if you need anything. I mean it. Downstairs, Mr. Martinez opened the car door. Good morning, Marcus. Sleep well? Not really, Marcus admitted, sliding into the leather seat. It was softer than anything he'd ever sat on. Understandable. Big changes can do that. Mr. Martinez got into the driver's seat. Mr. Thompson asked about you 3 times this morning. He's having one of his clearer days. The city looked different from inside the luxury car, less threatening, more like a movie set. They passed Gloria's Coffee, where the red-headed barista waved from behind the counter. Mr. Thompson had his usual breakfast today, Mr. Martinez said as they turned onto Highland Street. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. He remembered to ask for it himself. Marcus leaned forward. That's good, right? When he remembers things. Yes, but... Mr. Martinez's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The doctors say these clear moments might become less frequent. That's partly why today is so important. The Thompson house looked different in the morning light. The copper gutters gleamed like new pennies, and the garden burst with fall colors. Catherine stood on the front steps, talking to a man in an expensive suit who carried a briefcase. Marcus, she smiled as he got out of the car. Thank you for coming. This is Mr. Peters, our family lawyer. The lawyer nodded professionally. Young man, shall we go inside? We have some papers to discuss. The study looked exactly as it had the night before, but now Richard sat at the massive desk instead of the armchair. He looked up as they entered, his face brightening. Marcus, I was worried you were just a dream. The good ones usually are. I'm real, Mr. Thompson, Marcus said, taking the seat Catherine offered him. How are you feeling today? Clearer, Richard said. Like the fogs lifted a bit. I remember you helping me find my way home. Remember you holding my hand when I was scared. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, about the trust fund. Yes, Richard waved impatiently. Do what needs to be done. But first, he turned to Marcus. Would you tell me more about your grandfather? The lawyer sighed but sat back, opening his briefcase. Catherine perched on the edge of the desk, watching her father with a mix of love and worry. Well, Marcus began. Grandpa William was a teacher before he got sick. Math and science. He could explain anything in a way that made sense. Like you did yesterday, Richard said, when you explained about the fog in my mind. Made it less frightening somehow. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Grandpa used to say the same thing. That having someone understand made it easier. Tell me. Richard leaned forward. What happened to him? In the end, Catherine started to interrupt, but Richard held up his hand. Please. I need to know. Marcus looked down at his hands. The fog got thicker. He forgot more things, how to eat sometimes, how to talk. But he still knew us. Maybe not our names or who we were exactly, but he knew we loved him, that we were safe people. And when he passed, we were with him, Mom and me. He hadn't spoken in days, but right at the end, he squeezed our hands, like he was saying goodbye. Richard wiped his eyes. That's what I want, Catherine. When my time comes, not alone, not in some facility, with family, with people who understand the fog. The lawyer cleared his throat again. Perhaps we should discuss the terms of the trust fund. In a moment, Richard said. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a chessboard. First, Marcus, do you play? Grandpa tried to teach me, but I never got very good. Richard's eyes twinkled. Well, we'll have to fix that. Catherine, would you ask Gloria to send over my usual coffee? And something for Marcus. What would you like, son? Hot chocolate. Marcus suggested hesitantly. Perfect. Richard began setting up the pieces. Now, while Mr. Peters prepares his papers, let me teach you the game properly. Sometimes the best way to build trust is over a board of 6 to 4 squares. The next hour passed in a blur of pawns and bishops. Richard proved to be a patient teacher, just like Grandpa William had been. He explained each move carefully, his mind impressively sharp when focused on the game. Check, Marcus said tentatively, moving his knight. Richard beamed. Excellent. You see how you created a threat while also protecting your queen? That's good strategy. He turned to the lawyer. Did you see that move, Peters? This boy has a mind for planning. Mr. Peters looked up from his stack of papers. Indeed. So now, about these documents. Yes. Richard moved his king out of check. Marcus, what do you want to be when you grow up? The question caught Marcus off guard. I never really thought about it. We usually just focus on getting through each day. You know. Richard's face softened. That ends today. The trust fund will ensure you and your mother never have to worry about basics again. So dream bigger. What interests you? Marcus thought about it as he moved his bishop. I like helping people. Like Grandpa did when he was teaching. Like you said I helped you yesterday. A teacher? A doctor? A counselor? Catherine suggested. Maybe someone who helps people with Alzheimer's. Marcus said quietly. And their families? Because sometimes the families need help too. Richard's hand trembled as he reached for his coffee. Catherine, make a note. The trust fund should cover any education Marcus needs. Medical school, if he chooses that path. Mr. Thompson, Marcus started to protest, but Richard cut him off. Son, do you know what my company does? We develop technology. Software, hardware, things that make people's lives easier. But yesterday, when I was lost in the fog, none of that mattered. What mattered was a boy who stopped to help when others walked by, who knew how to calm me because he'd learned from experience with his grandfather. He moved his rook. Check. By the way, Marcus studied the board, trying to find an escape route. But it's too much. I just did what was right. Exactly, Richard said softly. In a world where doing what's right has become rare, you did it without hesitation. That deserves more than reward. It deserves investment. He smiled. And it's checkmate. I'm afraid. Want to play again? The lawyer finally managed to get everyone's attention, explaining the terms of the trust fund. Marcus's head spun at the numbers involved. His mother would never have to work 2 jobs again. They could move to a better apartment. He could go to any college he wanted. One condition, Richard said as Marcus prepared to sign. You visit me regularly. Play chess. Tell me stories about your grandfather. Help me navigate the fog like you did yesterday. That's not a condition, Marcus said, signing his name carefully. That's a gift. Later, as Mr. Martinez drove him home, Marcus watched the city roll by. The same streets he and Richard had walked yesterday looked different now. Not because of the trust fund or the promises of education, but because he'd found a new purpose. His phone buzzed. Catherine had sent him his schedule for the week. Chess with Richard on Tuesday. Dinner with the family on Thursday. A meeting with an educational consultant on Friday. But what made him smile most was the last line. Dad's looking forward to hearing more about Grandpa William. He says the fog's not so scary when you have someone who understands it. Marcus touched the phone screen gently. Yesterday, he'd helped a lost man find his way home. Today, he'd found his own path forward. The first sign of trouble came during their third chess game of the afternoon. Richard's hand froze over the bishop, his fingers trembling. "It's your move, Mr. Thompson," Marcus said gently. Richard blinked at the board. "The pieces, they're all wrong. They're not where they should be." Marcus recognized that tone, the same one his grandfather used when the confusion started creeping in. "We can take a break if you'd like." "No." Richard slammed his hand on the desk, making the chess pieces jump. "No, I need to finish. Need to remember." Catherine looked up from her laptop in the corner of the study. "Daddy, should I call Dr. Stevens?" "I don't need a doctor." Richard stood up abruptly, knocking over several pieces. I need. His voice trailed off as he looked around the study in growing panic. "Where am I?" Marcus stood slowly, keeping his movements calm like his mother had taught him to do with Grandpa. "You're in your study, Mr. Thompson. In your home. We were playing chess." "Chess?" Richard's eyes darted around the room. No, I should be at the office. I have a board meeting. Why aren't I at the office?" Catherine started to approach, but Marcus held up his hand. He'd seen this before. Too many people moving at once could make the confusion worse. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said quietly, "look at me. Remember how we talked about the fog? It's just rolling in a bit. But we're here with you. You're safe." Richard's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. "The fog? Yes, the fog. Like your grandfather. But I can't. Everything's slipping away." The nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "Mr. Thompson, let's get you some water." "I don't want water." Richard backed away from all of them. I need." His legs hit the leather armchair, and he sank into it, head in his hands. Marcus approached slowly, remembering how his grandfather would sometimes need physical contact to stay grounded. "May I hold your hand, Mr. Thompson? Like I did that day on the street?" Richard reached out blindly, grabbing Marcus's hand with desperate strength. Tell me about your grandfather again." "The stories help." Marcus sat on the arm of the chair, maintaining the physical connection. "Well, there was this one time Grandpa got confused during dinner. He thought the meatloaf was a brick." A small smile flickered across Richard's face. "A brick?" "Yeah. He kept asking why we were trying to feed him building materials. But instead of getting upset, Mom played along. Said it was a special kind of brick made of meat, and that's why it was so soft." Richard's grip loosened slightly. Did he believe her? He laughed. Said if we were building houses out of meatloaf, we'd better have some mashed potato mortar to hold it together. A weak chuckle escaped Richard's lips. "Your mother sounds wise." "She is. She taught me that sometimes it's better to step into someone's reality than try to drag them back to ours." The nurse approached with a glass of water and some pills. "Mr. Thompson, it's time for your medication." This time, Richard took them without protest. His hand was still wrapped around Marcus's, but the desperate grip had softened to a gentle hold. "I'm sorry," he said after a while, "for losing my temper, for knocking over the chess pieces." "Nothing to be sorry for," Marcus assured him. "Grandpa used to say that foggy days aren't anyone's fault. They just happen." Catherine had moved closer, tears in her eyes. "Maybe we should end the visit early." "No," Richard said firmly. "No, I want to finish our game. If Marcus is willing." Marcus helped Richard back to the chess table. The nurse had already set the pieces back up, and Mr. Martinez, who had appeared during the commotion, stood quietly by the door. "Your move, Mr. Thompson," Marcus said. "Take all the time you need." Richard stared at the board. I can't remember where the pieces were before." "That's okay. Let's start a new game. Sometimes fresh starts are better anyway." As they reset the board, Catherine touched Marcus's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. The doctors, they don't handle him like you do. They don't understand. Marcus thought about all the doctors who had treated his grandfather. They know the medicine part. But unless you've lived with it, you don't know how it feels. How scary the fog can be. They played slower this time. Richard took long pauses between moves, sometimes losing track of whose turn it was. But Marcus kept him engaged with stories about Grandpa William, about school, about anything that seemed to interest him. You know, Richard said during one of his clearer moments, I used to play chess with my father. Every Sunday after church. Was he good? Terrible. Richard smiled at the memory. But he loved the game. Said it taught patience. He moved his knight. I wish I could remember more about him. The fog takes so much. Marcus studied the board. Grandpa used to say that memories are like stars. Sometimes clouds cover them up, but they are still there, still shining. Your grandfather was a poet. No, just a science teacher. He liked explaining things so kids could understand them. Richard's hand trembled as he reached for his bishop. I'm scared, Marcus, of how much more the fog will take, of becoming a burden to Catherine. You're not a burden, Daddy, Catherine said from her corner. Never that. But I will be. The doctors say it will get worse. That soon I might not. His voice caught. Might not recognize you at all. Marcus moved his pawn forward. Grandpa forgot our names near the end. Forgot what year it was, where he lived. But he never forgot how to love us. He'd smile when we walked in the room, even if he couldn't remember why we made him happy. Richard knocked over his king, forfeiting the game. Will you stay? Even when the fog gets thicker? Even when I forget your name? Of course. Marcus helped him set the pieces up again. That's what friends do. Friends? Richard repeated the word like he was tasting it. Yes, I suppose we are. Strange, isn't it? An old man with a foggy mind and a boy who understands it better than all the doctors. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. They played 2 more games, Richard's concentration improving slightly after his medication kicked in. Mr. Martinez brought them cookies from Gloria's coffee, and Catherine worked on her laptop, looking up occasionally to smile at their game. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the study windows, Richard suddenly grabbed Marcus's hand again. Promise me something. What is it, Mr. Thompson? When the fog gets too thick, when I can't find my way back anymore, remember me like this. Playing chess, telling stories. Not the man who shouts and knocks things over. Marcus squeezed his hand. I'll remember all of you, Mr. Thompson. The clear days and the foggy ones. That's what Grandpa taught me. That people are whole people, even when parts of them get lost in the fog. Later, in the car ride home, Mr. Martinez cleared his throat. You handled that episode very well. Marcus watched the city lights blur past the window. I had a good teacher. Grandpa showed me how to navigate the fog. I wish I could make it go away completely. You do something better, Mr. Martinez said quietly. You make it less scary. For both Mr. Thompson and Ms. Catherine. When they pulled up to his building, Marcus saw his mother waiting on the steps. She must have switched shifts to be home early. How was it today, baby? She asked as he climbed out of the car. Marcus hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of diner coffee and discount shampoo. Foggy, but we got through it. Over his mother's shoulder, he saw Mr. Martinez nod respectfully before driving away. Tomorrow would be another day of chess and stories, of navigating the fog together. But tonight, he just wanted to hold his mom and remember his grandfather, the first teacher who showed him how to help lost souls find their way home. The autumn wind rattled the study windows as Marcus set up the chess pieces for their afternoon game. 2 weeks had passed since Richard's episode, and they'd fallen into a comfortable routine. Knight to e4, Richard said, then frowned. No, wait. That's not right. We haven't started yet. Marcus kept arranging the pieces. That's okay. Sometimes your mind just gets eager to play. Catherine watched from her usual spot, dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't been sleeping well. Marcus had overheard the nurse telling Mr. Martinez that Richard's nighttime wandering was getting worse. Did I tell you about the board meeting today? Richard asked, touching each white pawn as if counting them. You didn't have a board meeting today, Daddy, Catherine said gently. You retired 5 years ago, remember? Richard's hand froze over the board. Retired? No, that's not. I have responsibilities. The company needs me. Marcus recognized the danger signs. the slight tremor in Richard's hands, the confusion clouding his eyes. "Mr. Thompson, would you like to hear about what happened at school today?" "School?" Richard looked at him blankly. "Yes. Remember? I'm in 7th grade now. Thanks to your help with the trust fund." Recognition flickered across Richard's face. "Marcus. Yes, of course. The boy who helped me find my way home." "That's right. We play chess every Tuesday and Thursday." Richard relaxed slightly. "Chess? Yes. Like I used to play with someone. Your father," Marcus reminded him. "After church on Sundays. He was terrible at it." Richard smiled, then his face fell. "Or was that someone else? The fog? It's thick today." Catherine started to stand, but Marcus shook his head slightly. He'd learned that transitions needed to be handled carefully. "That's okay, Mr. Thompson. Why don't I tell you about my math test while we play? My teacher said I'm getting better at algebra." They started the game slowly, Richard taking long pauses between moves. Marcus kept talking, filling the silence with stories about school, about his mother's new job at a better restaurant, about their plans to move to a safer neighborhood. "Your life is changing," Richard said suddenly, with surprising clarity. "Because of what we did." "The trust fund?" "Yes. So Mom doesn't have to work 2 jobs anymore, and I can focus on school instead of worrying about bills." Richard moved his bishop. "Good. That's good. Money should help people, not just sit in banks." He paused. "I built my company to help people, didn't I?" "Thompson Technologies," Marcus confirmed. "They make medical equipment now, special machines that help doctors diagnose Alzheimer's earlier." "Alzheimer's," Richard repeated the word slowly. "That's what's making the fog in my mind." "Like your grandfather?" "Yes." So Richard knocked over his water glass. The nurse rushed forward to clean it up, but he waved her away. "I should be able to do this myself. I used to run a company." Marcus handed him a napkin. "Everyone needs help sometimes. Even company presidents." "Former president," Catherine corrected gently. "Daddy, remember? You made me CEO 5 years ago." Richard's face crumpled. "I did? I don't remember." Marcus reached across the chessboard and took his hand, the way he had that first day on the street. "That's what the stories are for, Mr. Thompson. To help you remember the important parts." "Tell me again." Richard squeezed his hand. "About the day we met. About how you helped me when I was lost." So Marcus told the story again, watching Richard's face as recognition came and went like clouds passing over the sun. He described the confused elderly man at the intersection, the crowd with their phones, the long walk home. "You weren't scared?" Richard asked. "Helping a stranger? A little. But you reminded me of Grandpa. And he always said being scared wasn't a good enough reason not to help someone." Richard nodded slowly. "Your grandfather is gone now?" "Yes, sir, 3 years ago. But you still remember him? Still tell his stories? Every day?" Richard turned to Catherine. "When the fog takes everything, will you tell my stories too?" Catherine wiped her eyes. "Of course, Daddy. Every day." "Good. That's good." Richard looked back at the chessboard. "Whose move is it?" "Yours." "Sir, I can't remember what I was trying to do." Marcus studied the board. "Looks like you were setting up a trap with your bishop. Pretty clever one, too." Richard smiled uncertainly. "Was I? I used to be good at this game." "You still are. On your clear days, you beat me every time. And on the foggy days?" "On the foggy days, we take our time. Tell stories. Sometimes start over if we need to." The nurse appeared with Richard's afternoon medication. As he took the pills, Catherine moved to sit closer to them. "Marcus, there's something we need to discuss." Richard looked up sharply. "You're not sending him away?" "No, Daddy. Actually, the opposite." She took a deep breath. "Would like to offer Marcus a more formal position. Part-time, after school. Not just visiting, but actually helping with your care." Marcus straightened in his chair. "Really?" Catherine nodded. "The nurses and doctors, they are excellent medical professionals. But they don't understand the fog like you do. Don't know how to navigate it. Like a fog guide," Richard said suddenly. "That's what you are, Marcus. A guide through the fog. We'd pay you, of course," Catherine continued. "And it would look good on your college applications, especially if you're still interested in studying medicine or healthcare." Marcus looked at Richard, who was staring at the chessboard again, mumbling something about a board meeting. What exactly would I do? Just what you're doing now. Visit regularly. Play chess. Tell stories. Help Daddy stay connected to his memories, his sense of self, and when he forgets me. Catherine's face softened. You already know how to handle that. I've seen you reintroduce yourself 3 or 4 times in a single afternoon, each time with the same patience. Richard looked up. Who are we talking about? You, Daddy. About having Marcus help take care of you. Marcus. Richard squinted at him. The boy who helped me find my way home. That's right, Mr. Thompson. Good boy. Kind boy. Reminds me of someone. Your father. Marcus suggested. The one who played chess with you. Yes. Yes. After church on Sundays. He was terrible at it. Richard beamed, then frowned. Or was that yesterday? It was a long time ago, Marcus said gently. But it's a good memory. Catherine watched them with tears in her eyes. You see, that's what we need. Someone who understands that every moment is both an ending and a beginning. That fog can lift and descend a dozen times in one afternoon. Marcus thought about his grandfather's final years, about the patience his mother had shown, the love that persisted even when recognition faded. I'll do it, he said, but I have one condition. Name it. We document everything. All the stories, all the memories. Write them down or record them. So even when the fog gets too thick, we'll have them safe. Richard moved a chess piece at random. Stories are important. They help you find your way home. Yes, Mr. Thompson, they do. Are you the boy who helped me when I was lost? Yes, sir, and I'll help you again. Every time you need it. Richard smiled, a moment of perfect clarity lighting up his face. I think I'd like that. Outside, the autumn wind continued to rattle the windows. Inside, 2 people from different worlds sat over a chessboard, navigating the fog together, finding their way home one story at a time. The moving boxes scattered across Marcus's bedroom floor still had price tags on them. His mother had insisted on buying new ones, not the used ones from the liquor store like they'd used in their previous moves. Baby. His mom appeared in the doorway, holding a framed photo of Grandpa William. Where should this go? Marcus looked up from the medical textbook he'd been reading, a gift from Catherine to help him understand Alzheimer's better. On my desk, maybe? Next to the chess set Mr. Thompson gave me. She placed the photo carefully next to the ornate wooden chess set. Still feels like a dream sometimes. All of this. Marcus closed the textbook. The past month had brought more changes than he could process. The trust fund had allowed them to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. His mother had found a better job at an upscale restaurant. And his new role as Richard's fog guide gave him a sense of purpose he'd never expected. His phone buzzed, a text from Catherine, Dad asking for you. Good day so far. Clear-headed. Mr. Thompson's having a good day, he told his mother. Mind if I head over? She smiled, but her eyes were worried. You've been spending a lot of time there. Is that bad? No, baby. Just different. A month ago, you were helping me deliver newspapers before school. Now you're having tea with billionaires. Marcus stood and hugged her. They're just people, Mom. People who need help, like Grandpa did. The doorbell rang. Mr. Martinez was right on time, as always. He'd been picking Marcus up every day after school, then bringing him home after dinner with the Thompsons. Good evening, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Martinez said when she opened the door. Master Marcus. Marcus grabbed his backpack. You don't have to call me that. Professional habit. But the security guard's eyes crinkled with amusement. The drive to the Thompson house was quiet. Marcus watched the city change as they moved from his new neighborhood to the even more upscale area where Richard lived. The trees were bigger here, the sidewalks cleaner. Gloria was just leaving as they arrived, carrying her empty coffee tray. Good timing. Mr. T's been asking for his chess partner. Inside, they found Richard in his study, but not in his usual spot. He stood by the window, staring at the garden. The roses, he said without turning around. Catherine's mother planted those roses. Or did Catherine plant them? The fog. It's playing tricks again. Your wife planted them, Marcus said, setting his backpack down. 25 years ago. Catherine takes care of them now. Richard turned, relief washing over his face. Marcus. Yes, I was waiting for you. We have a game to finish, don't we? Actually, "Sir, we finished yesterday's game. You won with that clever knight move. Remember?" Richard's face fell. No, no, I don't remember." He sank into his armchair. "Bad day yesterday." "Not bad," Marcus said, starting to set up the chess pieces. "Just foggy. You told some great stories about starting your company." "Did I? I wish I could remember them now." Catherine appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "You can, Daddy." Marcus recorded them. Marcus pulled out his phone and played the video from yesterday. Richard watched himself on the small screen, talking animatedly about the early days of Thompson Technologies, about working out of a garage with 2 programmers and a dream. That's really me? From yesterday?" "Yes, so we've been recording your stories. Building a memory library." Richard touched the phone screen gently. "I sound so sure of myself there. So clear." "You were. And you told me something important, about why you started the company." "I did." Marcus nodded. "You said you wanted to build things that helped people. That money was just a tool for making the world better." "Yes." Richard straightened up. "Yes, I remember that part. It's why we set up your trust fund, isn't it?" "That's right, Mr. Thompson." Catherine sat on the arm of her father's chair. "Daddy, do you want to show Marcus what else we've been working on?" Richard frowned in concentration. "The foundation?" "Yes, the foundation." "What foundation?" Marcus asked, making his first chess move. Catherine opened her tablet. "We're setting up the Thompson-Johnson Foundation for Alzheimer's family support. Using your experience with your grandfather and with Daddy to help other families navigate the fog." Marcus's hand froze over the chessboard. "Johnson? You're putting our name on it." "It was Daddy's idea. On one of his clear days last week." Richard moved a pawn. "Fog guides," he said. "We need more fog guides. People who understand. The human side," Marcus finished. "Not just the medical part." Yes, that's it exactly." Richard's eyes cleared for a moment. "Money can buy nurses and doctors and medicines. But understanding, that comes from experience. From living with the fog." Catherine showed Marcus the tablet. "The foundation will provide support groups, educational resources, and financial assistance to families affected by Alzheimer's. We'd like you to help design the programs, using what you learned with your grandfather." Marcus stared at the proposal on the screen. The budget numbers made his head spin. "But I'm just a kid who knew exactly what to do when everyone else walked past a confused old man," Richard said. "A kid who? His voice trailed off, confusion clouding his features again. "Who helped you find your way home," Marcus reminded him gently. Yes, that's right." Richard moved another chess piece. "Did I tell you about my father? He used to play chess with me after church on Sundays," Marcus said. "And he was terrible at it." Richard laughed. "Terrible, but he loved the game. Said it taught patience." "Yes, patience." Richard looked at the board. "Whose move is it?" "Yours. So you just moved your bishop." "Did I? Was it a good move?" Marcus studied the board. "Very good. You're threatening my knight." Catherine touched his shoulder. "You see why we need you? Not just for Daddy, but for all the families trying to navigate the fog alone." Marcus thought about all the nights he and his mother had felt lost and alone during Grandpa's illness. About how much they could have used someone who understood, who could show them the way forward. "When do we start?" Richard looked up. "Start what?" "The foundation, Daddy. Remember? To help other families dealing with Alzheimer's." "Ah, yes. The fog. It's thick today, isn't it?" "That's okay, Mr. Thompson. We'll find our way through together." The rest of the afternoon passed in a familiar pattern of chess moves and stories. Richard drifted in and out of clarity, sometimes sharp as ever, sometimes lost in the fog. Marcus guided him through each transition, recording new stories when they emerged, replaying old ones when needed. As the sun began to set, Richard suddenly grabbed Marcus's hand. "I remember now. Why we're doing the foundation." "Why's that, Mr. Thompson?" "Because some lights shine brightest in the fog. Like you. Like your grandfather." He squeezed Marcus's hand. "We need to help those lights find each other." Later, in the car ride home, Marcus watched the city lights blur past. Mr. Martinez cleared his throat. "Miss Catherine told me about the foundation. It's a good thing you're doing." Marcus thought about the proposal he'd seen, about all the families they could help. I just hope we can make a difference. You already have. Mr. Martinez pulled up to Marcus's new building. One chess game at a time. Upstairs, his mother was organizing their new kitchen. She took one look at his face and opened her arms. Good day or bad day? She asked as he hugged her. Both. Neither. Just different. He pulled back and smiled. Hey, Mom, want to hear a story about roses? The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church, casting blue and gold patterns across the chessboard. Richard had insisted on meeting here today, though he couldn't quite explain why. Something about Sundays, he kept muttering. Something important about Sundays. Marcus adjusted the board on the small table they'd set up in the quiet corner of the church's community room. You used to play chess here with your father, remember? After the service. Richard's eyes lit up. Yes, that's it. Every Sunday. He touched one of the wooden pieces. He was terrible at it, but he loved the game. Marcus finished with a smile. It was becoming their ritual, this trading of memories back and forth, keeping them safe between them. Catherine sat in a nearby pew, talking quietly with Marcus's mother. They'd all gathered here at Richard's request, though his reasons remained clouded in the fog of his mind. Check, Richard said suddenly, though they hadn't started playing yet. We haven't begun the game, Mr. Thompson. Would you like to start now? Richard frowned at the board. No. There's something else. Something important. He turned to Catherine. The papers. Did you bring the papers? Catherine opened her briefcase. Yes, Daddy. Mr. Peters is on his way with the final documents. Marcus looked between them, confused. His mother caught his eye and shrugged. She seemed equally puzzled. The church door opened, and Mr. Peters entered, his leather briefcase tucked under his arm. Mr. Martinez followed, carrying 2 coffee cups from Gloria's. Perfect timing, Richard said, his voice suddenly clearer. Marcus, do you know why I wanted to meet here today? Because of the chess games with your father. Partly, Richard accepted his coffee from Mr. Martinez. But also because this is where I made all my important decisions. Where I came to think when the fog was thick. Mr. Peters began laying out documents on a nearby table. Catherine stood and moved closer to her father. Are you sure about this, Daddy? It's a big step. The biggest decisions are often the clearest, Richard said. Even through the fog. He turned to Marcus. Son, do you remember the day we met? Of course. You were lost at the intersection. Everyone was just watching. But you reminded me of my grandfather. You stopped when others walked past. Helped when others just recorded with their phones. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he picked up his coffee. That day, you showed me something I'd forgotten. That the true measure of wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you give. Mr. Peters cleared his throat. The documents are ready, Mr. Thompson. Good. Richard stood shakily. Marcus, your mother should come closer for this part. Marcus's mom moved to stand behind him, placing her hands on his shoulders. What's going on? Richard took a deep breath. The trust fund we set up for Marcus's education was just the beginning. The foundation, that was the next step. But today we're doing something bigger. He nodded to Mr. Peters, who stepped forward with the documents. Mr. Thompson has decided to make Marcus his heir. The words echoed in the quiet church. Marcus felt his mother's hands tighten on his shoulders. What? Marcus whispered. Not the whole company, Richard clarified. Catherine will remain CEO. She's brilliant at it. But a significant portion of my personal assets, my shares in the company, and most importantly, my mission. Catherine touched her father's arm. Tell him why, Daddy. Tell him what you told me. Richard's eyes focused with remarkable clarity. Because you understand the fog. Not just my fog, but all of it. The confusion people feel when they are lost. The fear families face when their loved ones start slipping away. You understand that sometimes the biggest impact comes from the smallest kindnesses. Mr. Peters stepped forward. Legally, this makes Marcus your successor in controlling interest of the Thompson-Johnson Foundation, as well as beneficiary to a significant portion of your estate. The documents also establish him as a junior board member, with full voting rights when he turns 18. Marcus's mother found her voice. Mr. Thompson, it's too much. No, Richard said firmly. It's exactly right. I built my company to help people. Marcus has shown he knows how to do that better than anyone. He smiled sadly. And soon, Soon I won't be able to make these decisions anymore. The fog gets thicker every day. But, sir, Marcus protested, I don't know anything about running a company or a foundation. You know the most important part, how to help people find their way home. Richard sat back down, suddenly looking tired. Besides, you'll have Catherine to guide you through the business side. And your mother to keep you grounded. Mr. Peters laid out the papers. Everything has been reviewed by our legal team and Mrs. Johnson's lawyers. The terms are quite clear. Marcus looked at his mother, who nodded slowly. They'd spent weeks going over the documents with their own lawyers, making sure they understood every detail. There's one more thing, Richard said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out an old, tarnished pocket watch. This was my father's. He gave it to me the last time we played chess here. Said time was the most precious gift we could give someone. His hands shook as he held it out. I want you to have it. Marcus took the watch carefully. The metal was warm from being in Richard's pocket, and he could feel the gentle tick against his palm. I don't remember if I wound it today, Richard said, frowning. The fog. That's okay, Marcus said quickly. We can wind it together. They bent over the watch, Richard's hands steadying as they performed the familiar task. The soft clicking sound echoed in the quiet church. Your grandfather, Richard said suddenly. Would he approve of all this? Marcus thought about Grandpa William, about his lessons on kindness and patience. Yeah, I think he would. Good. Richard looked at the chessboard again. Were we playing? Not yet. Would you like to start? Yes, I think I would. He moved his first pawn. Did I ever tell you about my father? He used to play chess with me right here in this church. Every Sunday, Marcus said, making his own move. And he was terrible at it. Terrible. Richard laughed. But he loved the game. He paused, looking around the church. Why are we here today? To play chess, Marcus said gently. And to make some important decisions. Decisions? Yes. The papers. Did we sign them? Not yet. There's no rush. They played in comfortable silence for a while, the sunlight shifting patterns across the board. Mr. Peters and the lawyers waited patiently. Catherine and Marcus's mother talked quietly, and Mr. Martinez stood guard by the door. Finally, Richard looked up from the game. Marcus. Yes, Mr. Thompson. Thank you for being my fog guide, for helping me find my way home that day. Marcus touched the pocket watch in his pocket, feeling its steady tick. Thank you for showing me my way forward. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of signatures and legal terms, but what Marcus remembered most was the game of chess, played in a patch of colored sunlight, with the tick of an old pocket watch keeping time. 1 year had passed since that autumn afternoon when Marcus first spotted a confused elderly man at an intersection. The Thompson house looked the same from the outside, but inside, much had changed. Marcus adjusted the video camera on its tripod, making sure it captured both Richard and the chessboard clearly. They'd been recording every session now, preserving stories and memories against the deepening fog. Is it Wednesday? Richard asked, watching Marcus set up the chess pieces. Thursday, Mr. Thompson. Chess day. Remember? Ah, yes. Thursday. Richard touched each piece as Marcus placed it. Black or white today? You always play white, so like your father did. Richard smiled. He was terrible at chess, you know, but he loved the game. Marcus finished, settling into his chair. The routine was comfortable now, like a well-worn path through the fog. Catherine entered with a stack of papers. The Foundation's first quarterly report. Marcus. Want to review it after your game? Marcus nodded. The Thompson-Johnson Foundation for Alzheimer's Family Support had launched 3 months ago. Already, they'd helped dozens of families navigate the challenges of caring for loved ones with dementia. Foundation. Richard looked up. What foundation? Your foundation, Daddy. The one you started to help other families dealing with Alzheimer's. Richard frowned. The fog, it's thick today. Tell me about the foundation. Marcus moved his first pawn. We help people who are lost in the fog, Mr. Thompson. Like you helped me and my mom when we needed it. Your mother, she works at the good restaurant now. Yes, so she's a manager there. We moved to the safer neighborhood. Remember? Near Gloria's coffee. Gloria makes my coffee just right, Richard said, moving his knight. 2 sugars, splash of cream. The game proceeded slowly, each move accompanied by stories. Marcus had learned that the stories were more important than the game itself. They were anchors in the fog, helping Richard stay connected to who he was. Mr. Martinez appeared with the afternoon coffee delivery. Gloria sends her regards, Mr. Thompson. Says the roses in your garden are blooming beautifully. Roses? Richard looked out the window. Yes, my wife planted those. Or was it Catherine? Your wife planted them, Marcus said gently. Catherine takes care of them now. Richard nodded, then suddenly reached into his pocket. My watch. Did I win it today? Marcus pulled out the old pocket watch. Richard had given it to him in the church that day, but they still wound it together every afternoon. The familiar ritual seemed to calm Richard's anxiety. Let's win it now, Marcus suggested. They bent over the watch together, the soft clicking filling the quiet room. Catherine watched them with tears in her eyes. The past year had been hard. Richard's condition had deteriorated faster than expected. But somehow, these moments with Marcus kept him tethered to himself. Check, Richard said suddenly, his chess skills still sharp despite the fog. Marcus studied the board. Even on his foggiest days, Richard could still surprise him with brilliant moves. Well played, Mr. Thompson. Want to tell me what you're planning? Planning? Richard looked confused. Oh, the game. Yes, I had a strategy, but it's slipped away now. That's okay. We can figure it out together. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Time for medication, Mr. Thompson. Richard took his pills without protest, another change from a year ago. He'd learned to trust the rhythm of his days, even when he couldn't remember why. Marcus, he said after the nurse left, did I ever tell you about the day we met? Sometimes I tell that story to you, Marcus smiled. Would you like to hear it? Please. The good stories, they help push back the fog a little, so Marcus told the story again, about the confused man at the intersection, the crowd with their phones, the long walk home. As he spoke, he noticed Richard mouthing certain parts along with him, muscle memory keeping the words safe even when his mind couldn't. You were very brave, Richard said when the story ended. Helping a stranger. You reminded me of my grandfather. Ah yes, William the science teacher. He taught you about the fog. Marcus straightened in surprise. You remembered his name. Did I? Richard looked pleased, then uncertain. Is that right? It's so hard to know what's real sometimes. It's right. His name was William, and he taught science, and he showed me how to help people find their way home. Catherine touched Marcus's shoulder. Just like you showed us how to help Daddy find his way home every day. Richard moved another chess piece. The foundation, we help other families now. Yes, so we've set up support groups in every major hospital. Created a network of what you called fog guides, people who've cared for loved ones with Alzheimer's, who can help new families navigate the journey. Good. Richard nodded. Money should help people, not just sit in banks. Did I say that once? You say it a lot, Marcus smiled. It's one of your clearest memories. They played on as the afternoon light shifted. Through the window, they could see the garden where Richard's wife had planted roses so many years ago. A young couple walked past with an elderly woman between them, one of the families the foundation had helped. Marcus, Richard said suddenly. Yes, Mr. Thompson? Thank you. For. He gestured vaguely, struggling to find the words. For being your fog guide. Yes, that's it. And for keeping the stories safe. Marcus touched the pocket watch in his pocket. That's what friends do, Mr. Thompson. We hold each other's stories when they can't hold them themselves. Richard smiled, a moment of perfect clarity lighting his face. Like my father with his chess games. He was terrible, you know, but he loved playing. Every Sunday after church. Richard looked at the board. Checkmate, by the way. Marcus blinked in surprise. Sure enough, Richard had trapped his king in a brilliant combination he hadn't seen coming. Even through the fog, some things remained sharp and true. Well played. So want to set up another game? Yes, please. And Marcus, tell me a story while we play. About the day we met, perhaps. I hear it's a good one. So as the sun began to set, Marcus set up the pieces again and began the story once more. Outside, the city moved in its endless rhythm. Inside, two people from different worlds sat over a chessboard, keeping each other's memories safe, finding their way home one move at a time. Catherine watched them from her corner, recording another session for the Foundation's archives. On the screen, an elderly man and a young boy bent over a chessboard, their hands moving in perfect sync as they wound an old pocket watch together. The light through the windows wrapped them in gold, and for a moment, the fog seemed to lift completely. "Your move, Mr. Thompson," Marcus said. Richard moved his first pawn, starting another game, another story, another journey through the fog. But this time, neither of them walked alone.